Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking you to let her out. These were the words our 4-year-old daughter said during a quiet family drive. I didn't miss the way my husband froze when she said it. His face turned pale, and he glanced at our daughter in the rearview mirror, looking completely terrified. Whether he was just pretending or genuinely scared, it was clear that he was shaken. "What a scary thing to say," he said, trying to sound calm. "You shouldn't tell such lies." I shot him a sharp look from the passenger seat, feeling a mix of suspicion and unease. "Maybe we should stop at the rest area," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. We had been married for 5 years, and I had always supported him, knowing how busy he was with work. But now, it seemed like the truth about him was starting to come out, and our daughter was the one revealing it. "My name is Anna Clark, and I married my husband, Stephan, when I was 24. He's 4 years older than me, and the next year, we welcomed our daughter, Linda, into the world. She's been growing up healthy and happy, and now she's 4 years old. Our family was always busy, but we were happy. How about going to the zoo next Sunday?" Stephan asked one day during a cheerful conversation. "Yay! I want to see the giraffes," Linda exclaimed, her face lighting up with excitement. I couldn't help but smile at their joyful exchange. Stephan had always been kind, even when we were dating, and that hadn't changed after we got married and had Linda. He was a wonderful father, always making time for us on his days off, and I felt so lucky to have married him. Watching them play together made me feel so happy. But I had no idea that these peaceful days were about to end. "Huh? You're being transferred to a different department?" I asked one evening when Stephan came home looking exhausted. "Yeah, it's company policy," he said with a heavy sigh. "They want me to gain experience in different areas." Unfortunately, it looked like he was being moved to the busiest department at work, which meant he wouldn't have as much time to spend with us. "Daddy, are you not going to play with me anymore?" Linda asked, her big eyes filled with worry. "I'll do my best to spend as much time with you as possible, Linda," Stephan replied, gently stroking her hair. "We'll go to the zoo again soon, I promise." As I watched the two of them, my heart felt tight with emotion. It was tough news for our family. Even though his transfer didn't come with a pay cut or require us to move, the thought of having less time together made me feel lonely. But I knew that Stephan was probably feeling even more vulnerable, having to adjust to a new and challenging environment. "Please, don't push yourself too hard," I said quietly, wishing things could stay the same forever. I knew that Stephan had a habit of getting completely absorbed in things. That's why I was always a bit worried he might overdo it, especially with work. Unfortunately, my concerns turned out to be right. At first, Stephan managed to balance his busy work schedule with time for our family and some rest. But about a month later, everything changed. Suddenly, he was hardly ever home anymore. Stephan started working overtime, often coming back late at night when our daughter, Linda, was already asleep. He also began going out for drinks with clients more frequently, and to make things worse, he started working even on his days off. There was something else that had me concerned about him, too. "Hey, can you take a day off next Sunday?" I asked him one evening. "Linda misses you, and you've been working too hard lately." His response wasn't what I expected. "Huh? Who do you think I'm working so hard for?" he snapped. "Should I just turn down client meetings and risk getting fired?" "I didn't mean it like that," I said, trying to keep calm. "I'm just worried about you." "That's none of your business," he shot back. "Anyway, make sure you have money ready for next week's drinking party." Stephan had become so overwhelmed with work that he was constantly irritable and often took out his frustrations on me. It was painful to see him like this, especially because I knew how kind he used to be. But now, his spending was getting out of control too. He kept saying it was necessary for entertaining clients, but it was starting to affect our household expenses. Because I remembered how sweet and considerate he used to be, I found myself more worried than angry about his current behavior. I knew I had to find a way to get him to slow down before he collapsed from all the stress and overwork. 6 months passed since his transfer, and by then, Stephan was coming home just to sleep. Linda, who was feeling lonely because she hardly ever saw her dad, started looking sad more often. It was heartbreaking to see her like that, and I knew things couldn't go on like this. I tried to think of ways to help Stephan take a break, but it seemed like every time I made a plan, something else would go wrong. The worst came when my mother, who had been sick for several years, suddenly passed away in the hospital. "No, Mom," I whispered in disbelief. My father had died when I was young, so my mom was my only parent. The shock of losing her was overwhelming, especially because I didn't even get a chance to have a proper conversation with her before she passed. When I got the news at home, I was so stunned that I couldn't move for a while. But what really shocked me was Stephan's reaction. "Hey, do I have to go to that funeral too?" he asked, his voice cold and uncaring. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My eyes widened in disbelief. I knew Stephan's relationship with my mother wasn't the closest, but she was still his family, too. Despite that, he showed no sadness, no sympathy, nothing. Instead, he just complained about having to attend the funeral. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Of course you have to. It's a family funeral. Don't get mad at me," he grumbled. Why does this have to happen now?" His words and attitude left me speechless. I couldn't understand how he could be so indifferent at a time like this. It felt like the loving, caring husband I once knew was slipping away, and I didn't know how to get him back. Now, I had my own plans. Despite my reprimand, Stephan showed no signs of regret, and I was left feeling shocked. In the past, he would have comforted me, maybe rubbed my back, and we would have grieved together. But now, as he sighed with dissatisfaction, he seemed nothing like the man I had once promised to spend my future with. Naturally, he didn't offer any help with the preparations for my mother's funeral, so I had to arrange everything on my own. On the day of the service, my husband remained silent and sullen. When the funeral finally ended, he simply said, "It's over now, right? I'm heading home first." Without helping with any of the cleanup, he quickly left, going back home. At first, I was confused by his reaction, but by then, I had lost the energy to be angry. Instead, I was just bewildered and deeply disappointed in him. No matter how busy and stressed he might have been from work, his behavior at the funeral was unacceptable. When did my husband become such a cold person? As I stood there feeling frustrated, my daughter, Linda, tried to cheer me up. "Mom, Linda will help you," she said sweetly. Despite my feelings toward Stephan, I finished cleaning up with Linda by my side. Afterward, I decided to stop by my parents' house for a short while before heading home. It wasn't far from our place, and I wanted to spend a little time there, reminiscing about my mother. I didn't think twice about my decision to visit, and I felt it was the right thing to do. When we arrived at my parents' house, my heart was heavy with grief, but what I discovered there was even more shocking. "Mom, wait a moment," Linda suddenly exclaimed as soon as we entered the house. Without warning, she dashed straight into the back room. I had taken her to visit my mother's place several times before, but I had never seen her act like this. Worried, I hurried to follow her. When I caught up, I found Linda opening the second drawer from the bottom of the dresser, as if something had drawn her to it. "Mom, Grandma wants you to have this," she said, holding an old hand mirror. I couldn't help but catch my breath. The mirror had always been precious to my mother. She had treasured it so much that even I rarely saw her use it, and I didn't even know where she kept it. There was no way Linda could have known about this mirror. "How did you know it was here?" I asked, bewildered. And what do you mean Grandma wanted me to have it? When Grandma was sleeping earlier, she told me that you were sad and asked me to give this to you, Linda answered innocently. I couldn't hide my surprise at her response. It didn't seem like just a coincidence, so I began asking her more questions. I asked about tomorrow's dinner menu, what I had been thinking about, and even random thoughts in my mind, trying to understand what was happening. During the funeral, Linda answered every question I asked her with an accuracy that left me stunned. These were things she couldn't possibly have known. To my surprise, it seemed that my daughter had a mysterious ability to know what people were thinking. Wow, that's amazing, Linda. You know everything, I said, stroking her head, still feeling bewildered. I had always thought that mysterious abilities were just something from stories, never imagining that my own daughter might actually have such a power. While I was still trying to process this, Linda put her hand on her hip and gave me a proud look. That's right. Linda knows about Dad too, she declared. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking as I braced myself for her answer. What she told me next was so unbelievable, yet so unforgivable, that it left me reeling. A few weeks after my mother's funeral, I decided to take action. One morning, as Stephan was about to leave for work, I casually mentioned, by the way, I'm visiting a friend with Linda next Sunday. Stephan, who had been in the middle of putting on his shoes, abruptly stopped and frowned. He looked genuinely troubled. Really? Oh no, I'm off that day. That's too bad, he said, trying to sound disappointed. I could sense the artificiality in his voice, and quietly, I smiled to myself, careful not to give anything away. Now that I knew the truth, there was no love left for Stephan in my heart. On that Sunday, I left home with Linda, but instead of going far, I just killed about an hour and then returned home. Dad, he's over there, Linda said, pointing towards the garage. I followed her gaze and walked over to the garage, where the shutter was still down. Taking a deep breath, I lightly knocked on the shutter. Stephan, I know you're in there. Open it. Anna? I thought you and Linda had plans, came Stephan's voice from inside, sounding surprised and nervous. It's canceled. If you're going somewhere, we want to come with you, I replied calmly. Stephan hesitated, clearly flustered and unsure of what to do. I already had a pretty good idea of what was happening inside, but I stayed quiet and just observed. Linda, sensing the tension, chimed in with her sweet voice, Daddy, I want to go for a drive too. Unable to resist his daughter's hopeful tone, Stephan had no choice but to agree. A few minutes later, he reluctantly opened the garage, and we all got into the car for a drive together. As I sat in the passenger seat, watching Stephan's profile as he drove, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. The life we had shared together had once been enjoyable and happy, but now I understood that those days were gone forever. Hey, I said quietly, breaking the silence. Did you know that Linda has a special power? I finally decided to bring it up as we merged onto the highway. My husband furrowed his brows, confused by my sudden statement. Huh? What's that supposed to mean? That's a silly joke, he laughed dismissively. But then, from the back seat, our daughter Linda confidently raised her voice. Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking you to let her out. I didn't miss the way my husband's face froze for a moment. Whether he was trying to play dumb or not, his face went pale, and he looked at our daughter through the rearview mirror with a frightened expression. Husband, what a scary thing to say. You shouldn't tell such lies, he stammered. But it's true, Linda insisted. Then should we pull over at the rest area? I suggested, noticing that Linda was now hanging her head down. Stephan immediately looked at me with a startled expression. Huh? We don't need to do that. It's just a kid's joke, he said, trying to dismiss it again. Linda has a mysterious power, you know. I continued calmly. Besides, it's hot today, and it could be dangerous if someone's really in there. Stefan's expression twisted, and after flinching, he reluctantly agreed, heading toward the rest area with a contorted look on his face. When we arrived, we left Linda in the air-conditioned car and went outside to check the trunk. "There's nothing in there, come on, quickly," he muttered, starting to hesitate. I could see the fear in his eyes, and it became clear he couldn't escape this situation anymore. He nervously opened the trunk, breaking into a cold sweat. In the next moment, someone jumped out from inside. "I knew you were cheating," I exclaimed as a young woman with a flushed, red face from the heat emerged. Yes, it turned out that while Linda and I were out, Stephan had been cheating with her at our home. They were probably about to go for a drive when we came back unexpectedly, so he had no choice but to hide her in the trunk. Stephan shook his head nervously, trying to calm the woman who seemed shocked and confused by the situation. "No, it's not like that. She's a colleague from work. We were just working together," he stammered. "Wow, at the new apartment? Doing a job by getting into a trunk." I chuckled at his ridiculous lie, standing firm. I then took a piece of paper from my bag and held it up. "And what is this?" I asked, showing them the paper. It read, "Let's go on a drive date on Sunday." Both Stephan and the woman turned pale when they saw it. That was no surprise because their lovey-dovey email exchanges were printed on the paper. "Thanks to Linda, I found out everything," I said calmly, revealing that my daughter had confided in me on the day of my mother's funeral when we were at my parents' house. "Daddy has been spending a lot of time with Jessica lately. I'm sad because Jessica is taking Daddy away from me." When Linda said this, it made me suspicious. Just moments earlier, I had witnessed her strange ability to know things that she shouldn't have. So, I decided to keep an eye on Stephan for a while. It wasn't long before I found undeniable evidence of his affair on his phone. That's when I came up with a fake plan to catch him. I wanted to punish him, and that's how this whole car ride came to be. "It's unfair to look through my phone without permission," Stephan protested, shaking in anger. His absurd remark made me burst into laughter. "I thought you were just too busy with work to come home, but it seems you were spending that time with Jessica," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You probably used our money to go on dates with her, and now you're talking about what's unfair?" By then, Stephan was at a loss for words. I pulled out my phone from my pocket and continued, "Oh, and by the way, I've been recording everything since we got into the car." I expected something like this might happen, so I secretly started recording. And guess what? I've got plenty of evidence, not just messages, but videos too. Stefan's face turned white. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. I didn't just stop at the phone. I put hidden cameras in the house and garage, and I know everything about you, Jessica. Jessica, who had been silent until now, looked equally terrified. She was a 23-year-old new employee who had started working with Stephan in his new department. From what I gathered in their messages, she knew I existed, but that didn't stop her from carrying on with the affair. She was just as guilty as Stephan. Sorry, Anna," Stephan whimpered, probably realizing how cornered he was. It was a voice I had never heard from him before, full of fear and desperation. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook. "I won't forgive either of you," I said firmly. "Prepare yourselves for alimony." The reality of their situation seemed to hit them both at once, and they collapsed to their knees. In the end, I divorced Stephan. All the evidence I had gathered paid off. They were ordered to pay $500,000 in compensation. I also secured $700 a month in child support from Stephan. But their troubles didn't stop there. Word of their affair spread throughout the company, making things awkward for both of them. Eventually, they broke up. Their colleagues looked at them with disapproval, and they had no choice but to resign. Now, I've heard they're struggling, burdened with compensation payments and jobless. As for me, I'm enjoying peaceful days with Linda. I'm determined to shower her with love and support so she can grow up happy, especially with her wonderful power.